History of Feminism and the Three Waves That Took the World by Storm. As a philosophy, feminism is fundamentally about female empowerment, combating sexism, and shoring up women's rights. Each wave of feminism brought about social movements focusing on different emphasis points such as gender identity, equality, work rights, and equal pay rights. This is a narration of the journey to the feminist movements. The earliest traces of feminism are found in Rome. In the 3rd century BCE, Roman women filled the Capitoline Hill and blocked every entrance to the Forum when Consul Marcus Porcius Cato resisted attempts to repeal laws limiting women's use of expensive goods. He said, "If they are victorious now, what will they not attempt? As soon as they begin to be your equals, they will have become your superiors." For most of recorded history, only isolated voices spoke out against the inferior status of women, presaging the arguments to come. In the late 14th and early 15th century France, the first feminist philosopher, Christine de Pizan, challenged prevailing attitudes toward women with a bold call for female education. Her mantle was taken up later in the century by Laura Siretta, a 15th century Venetian woman who published Epistolae Familiares, Personal Letters, English translation, Collected Letters of a Renaissance Feminist, a volume of letters dealing with the panoply of women's complaints, from denial to education and marital oppression to the frivolity of women's attire. In the end of the 16th century, Il Merito del Don, The Worth of Women, was published posthumously by a feminist Venetian author, Moderetta Fonte. The first wave of feminism. The first women's movement to take to the streets in the United States corresponded to first wave feminism's philosophy as a whole. Women deserve all the same basic rights as men. It unofficially began in the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention in New York and culminated when the 19th Amendment secured voting rights for women. It was a spur of the movement idea that sprang up during a social gathering of Lucicia Mott, a preacher and veteran social activist. This embryonic feminist movement had little connection with ordinary women cleaning houses in Liverpool or picking cotton in Georgia. The single non-white woman's voice heard at this time, that of Sojourner Truth, a former slave, symbolized the distance between the ordinary and the elite. Her famous speech was delivered in 1851 before the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. Despite initially partnering with abolitionists like Sojourner Truth, the interests of white feminists began to diverge from those of black women throughout this first wave. The second wave of feminism. "The personal is political" became a common refrain during this period. The words exemplify how second wave feminism foregrounded individual expression for women, demands for contraception, anger about domestic violence, protests for abortion rights as symbols of oppression characterized this period. It was during this time that feminists such as Simone de Beauvoir came out with her book, The Second Sex, and Shula Smith Firestone came out with her book, The Dialectic of Sex. As Betty Friedan's feminist classic, The Feminine Mystique, found its way into many bookshelves, Congress passed the Equal Pay Act of 1963. Activists lobbied successfully for an Equal Rights Amendment 1972. Although the second wave of feminism coincided with the civil rights movement, black women and other women of color still struggled against marginalization in relation to white women's demands for equality with white men. Black women were forced to confront the interplay between racism and sexism. Such issues were addressed by black feminists, including Michelle Wallace, Bell Hooks, and others. The third wave of feminism. Beginning in earnest around the 1970s and 90s, the third wave of feminism attempted to rectify some of the racism and classism inherent in previous feminist movements and activism. The third movement was about gender interpretation of LGBTQIA issues taking center stage. It was also the time when feminists such as Judith Butler and Michel Foucault influenced public opinion through their works. The fourth wave of feminism. Fourth wave feminism is still defining itself. It continues third wave feminism's efforts against the marginalization of women of color. It also places a great emphasis on including trans women in feminism's efforts, fighting for people's right to define their gender alongside the historic goal of gender equality. Alongside, these are more inclusive and intersectional calls for social justice. Fourth wave feminism also gave birth to #MeToo movement and other campaigns calling for the end of sexual harassment and violence against women. I hope you liked this short video on feminist insights. Thank you.